You have probably seen content out there about how to save time editing your episodes and uploading your episodes and promoting your podcast. But the real time suck for most podcasters is actually planning the episode itself before you ever hit record. That's why I invited podcast productivity expert Joe Casabona to share his simple framework to help you streamline your episode prep time so that you can free up your creativity with a smarter and faster way to prep episodes that connect and convert. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Joe, what up? Welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I am so psyched to talk to you today.
I am psyched to talk to you too, because I know that your zone of genius is helping people save time when it comes to the production of their show. How do we streamline those processes around the actual production of the podcast and getting it out into the world, which I know you talk all about on your podcast. But something I know that you're even more passionate about is helping people implement systems on the content ideation and creation side of the process before hitting record, which can take up, honestly, the bulk of the time as a podcast host, at least is true in my experience. So you've got a framework for this that I know we're going to unpack in a moment. But first, I'm just curious to get your take on where is it that you think podcast hosts go wrong when it comes to the actual process of planning episodes that makes it take longer than it needs to take?
There's nothing worse than sitting down at a computer in front of a microphone and having no idea what you're going to talk about. And then what adds to that pressure, right, is if you're not batching your content, and you're like, well, I need to record something because I don't have an episode for this week. And so that 1-2 punch is something that really leads people to quitting their show or not thinking it's worth it, because just so much mental energy and exhaustion goes into that. And you're like, oh, I put all of this strain and effort and stress into this episode, and like 5 people are going to listen to it. Whereas if you have ideas in the tank and ready to go, you can sit down and record a couple and get ahead. And then that content's also going to be better because you're not just sitting down and going, well, I guess probably today I'm going to talk about my favorite notebooks or whatever.
Okay, so what would you say about those creative people there who are listening right now and who are like, but I feel better when I just get that hit of inspiration. It's a thing that comes in the shower, or I'm out there, I'm walking the dogs. Let me go plan an episode about that. And they kind of get into this habit of waiting for that inspiration to strike before they can create the content, which leads them to this exact problem.
Yeah, so let me tell you, right? I gave a speech at back to school night and I was racking my brain. What am I going to do? Nobody wants to hear this speech. They just want to get to meeting the teachers and get out and go home and enjoy their evening. I was really racking my brain. And like the Monday before I was supposed to give the speech, like you said, inspiration in the shower. Tell the story about how you used to put a sweater over your head and make people call you Sister Josephine. True story. And how your second grade teacher had you take that energy and put it into drama club. And yeah, inspiration struck, right? But over the couple of weeks I was thinking about it, anytime I thought, oh, this could be a good story for it, I wrote it down in the notes app. Inspiration striking is great, but having gas in the tank for those days when inspiration is not striking and you still have to make content is even better.
Yeah. Okay. So what about on the opposite end of that spectrum where you've got someone who, like myself, is like, I love to batch content. I love to be as far out as possible as we can be on content. But then when you actually get to that point of like sharing the content and it's like, okay, that episode has aired. You recorded it 4 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago, whatever it was. Now I don't feel connected to it anymore. Or maybe you planned it out and you planned it 4 weeks ago and now it's time to record it. And you're like, yeah, but I just don't feel connected to it. What would you say to those people?
The easiest thing for me to do is think about what my audience has been asking about. If something came up and someone said, hey, like I can't hire an editor, but I spend too much time on editing and I had an idea about that, then that's the one I'll run with, right? So this requires you to be engaged with your audience, having a mailing list or a presence on social media. Court, you're really good at that. Having that like 1-2 punch again of like, oh, audience is asking about this and I had an idea about it is usually my formula for I have too many ideas. Which one am I going to pick this week?
Yeah. Well, and also on that note, I feel like there are a lot of podcast hosts who struggle because they feel like it's crickets when they put an episode out there. They're like, I send an email out and I say, hit reply and tell me this. And like they get no replies back. Or they put a social post out and it's like, what do you want to see next on the podcast? Right. And they get no feedback. And that can be really discouraging. It can be really disheartening. It can make you feel really bad about yourself if you feel like you are not getting the engagement that you want from your audience right now. Then what can we do about that? How can we go to other places that maybe we're not thinking about in our business where people actually are asking you questions, or other sources on the internet where people are asking these questions that could drive those ideas to pop up in your head and be like, oh, I could answer this, this, and this. Do you have any like tips on that as far as where else could we look for those kinds of questions that people might be asking, even if it's not our people?
Yeah. So first I'll say, like, for your people, one of my coaches told me this one time and it like changed my life. I would always email my list and be like, hey, what should I write about next? Or hey, what should I sell? Like, what should my next course be on? And he was like, you are asking your audience to do your work for you. If you're thinking like, hey, what do you want to hear about next? Try to frame it differently. Get opinions from them. Be like, hey, what are you struggling with growth, or what are you struggling with editing? Because that's more concrete, right? Ever get a question on a survey that's like, name the best moment from your childhood versus name a memorable moment from your childhood? Name the best, you're going to be like, well, was this the best or was that the best? I don't know. But like memorable is like, yeah, okay, I have a bunch of those. So, and I've been doing this lately and I've been getting a lot more engagement from my mailing list, which is just like warms my heart. Now, as far as not your audience, right, there are a bunch of places that I have had varying levels of success with. Reddit is a place where conversations are happening. And I'll tell you what, most of the people on Reddit, like most of the people on Twitter, are like confidently wrong about stuff. So if you get a good question and like give a good answer, but then also that's an answer that you could take and make your next episode or your next newsletter. Like, again, Twitter or Threads, like this is where social media is just really good because it is like a public square.
One of the things that I've done too is I will just type the topic into Google and go down, like scroll down past the first couple of hits and the sponsored content to like what people are asking. And sometimes like the question right there, it's like, oh, there's your episode title right there. What is this thing, that people are asking that you can go into on the episode. One of the things too that a lot of people do, I think, to ideate content is they turn to AI. In theory, AI is supposed to help save time on so many things. But also on the flip side of that, if you are an emerging thought leader who really wants to be seen as that binge-worthy go-to thought leader in your niche, you can run the risk of relying too heavily on that to where you're blending in with other people, not standing out. So where do you see AI's role when it comes to helping with content ideation and creation? And on the flip side, how do you see that can actually hurt your content?
Yeah, this is a great question, right? And I think, I don't know if you've noticed this, but like the more I use an AI, the worse it gets. And it's because it's learning from other AI generated content, right? So I'll say like, hey, I'm thinking about doing a blog post or newsletter or whatever, a podcast episode about this thing. I was thinking about doing a podcast episode about underwater basket weaving. What are some things I should know about underwater basket weaving? And you ask it Socrates-esque fashion a couple of questions, and now you're taking what it's putting in front of you and you're like, okay, now I have enough and I know I have domain knowledge here. How can I turn this into an episode? It's not like write an episode for me on underwater basket weaving, right? Because that's where you get garbage. But if you just ask it a few leading questions and then you're like, oh, this is a thing that I haven't heard people talking about that I feel I can give my unique point of view on, that's where the money is with AI, like research and ideation.
I agree with you. Also, because as thought leaders, you got to first be able to know what your thoughts are on a topic to be able to speak to it in a way that attracts people to you, in a way that people are going to make them go, oh, that's a good point, or oh, that makes a lot of sense, or oh, I want more of what this person is saying because I never thought about it that way. And here you are shifting their perspective, which is really one of the most powerful types of content that you can create. So I want to dig into this framework with you, Joe, because I think this is going to clear up a lot of confusion people have around how much time they should be spending on content creation and ideation. Are there any places where we can streamline that process to help us save time? Because I know for me, when I'm going into an interview, I'm spending 2+ hours preparing for that interview. I'll go listen to other people's podcasts. podcast interviews that they've been on. If they have a book, I read the book. I might ideate there on questions and I play with the order of the questions. Then I'm going to get to the interview and actually throw out most of the questions because I'm like, no, this is what I need to be asking. But all of that preparation helps to be able to get the content that we can get in a 20-minute window of time here so that it's valuable for you, it's valuable for those listening, and it's valuable for any future listeners who may come across this episode, both to bring them into our network and to yours. So can you break this framework down for us? First, tell us what the framework is, and then let's go through each step of the framework point by point.
Yes. So it is the calm framework, right? I don't want this to be scary or crazy or anything. I want you to be calm with this. It's capture, articulate, leverage, and measure. So, and I think like the capture is really like the crucial part here. I have been talking about this for a long time, and people will come to me and they'll say, I don't capture ideas. If it's good enough, it'll come back to me. No, it will not. Like, you are either a young person who has a very elastic brain that's not weighed down by all the million things you need to do with like kids and a mortgage and cars, or you're just like, I'm good. I got it. I used to be the I'm good. I got it guy, right? Like I can remember the shirt I was wearing in Disney World in 2001. No, like there's too much on my mind now, right? So I decided a few years ago that I'm holding my oldest in my arms, and I had an idea and I didn't have a good way to capture it. So I decided then I need to be able to yell into the void and capture an idea. This is the process that works for me. You need to think about the process that works for you. What is a situation where no matter when you get an idea, you can capture it? So for me, yes, I have pens and paper everywhere. I love fountain pens, and I always have one in arm's reach. When I am driving, when I am out on a walk and I left my phone at home, when I am wrangling my children and I have an idea, I don't have a pen handy. And so I made it so that I can talk to my assistant, which I won't say and activate everybody's phones. And I'll say, I have an idea. Then it will capture what I said and make a note in Apple Notes for me. The tool doesn't matter. Like the note app doesn't matter, right? Wherever you hang out is fine. I like Apple Notes because it works very nice with the assistant. On my watch, I've programmed the action button so that it starts Whisper Memo, which is an app that makes an AI transcript of whatever you're saying. And then it emails it to you. So these are the things that work for me. Find the things that work for you. If you're on an Android phone, Google Assistant will do that. Probably a little bit better than Apple's Assistant, but we'll see what happens as the new phones are coming out. So that is number one. Make it as easy as possible to capture ideas no matter where you are, because you can sort them later. The thing is, you don't want to lose them. If you've ever woken up in the middle of the night and you're like, I have a great idea, I'll remember it in the morning. You will not remember it in the morning, and then you'll just be filled with regret.
Yes, case in point. I was like, oh, this would be a great opening for our podcast description. It was this idea that just came to me. I'm like, I need to cite this stat. And I have been trying to get that idea back, Joe, for like 3 weeks now, and it's gone. I don't know. Maybe it'll come back to me one day, but I'm like, I can't wait around for it. This needs to happen now. I need to be able to check close the tab that I opened in my brain when I said I need to update this description, this part of this description. So to your point, yes, having that system in place for capturing the notes. I'm curious, before we move into articulate, you mentioned about sorting the notes too. What's your process for that? Because I know for me, I am a sticky note girl, and I have sticky notes that label the sticky notes as to what the pile of sticky notes is about so that I can remember and be like, okay, here's my notes on my notes. And it's a mess. Now it's my curated chaos, and I'm the only one who can decipher it. If anything ever happened to me, God bless my husband, trying to come into my office and figure out what the heck was going through her head. But tell us about your system for sorting the notes too, because I know for me, if I've got some that are being emailed and some that are being kept in, the notes app or whatever app you're using to keep them, that for me can feel a little messy. So do you have a process for like cleaning that up without it taking a lot of time?
Yes. So my process comes largely from Building a Second Brain by Tiago Forte. This is like, I don't think a lot of business books have changed my life. I think they all more or less sound the same. Like, read the Checklist Manifesto. Okay, got it. And so I have a task. It's my only task on Sundays. And it's because I wake up before my family and I'm like fresh from probably not working on Saturday. And it's called my startup routine. And so, as part of my startup routine, I write down my hopes and dreams for the week, the tasks I need to accomplish, everything on my calendar. And then I go through all of the kind of unsorted notes. So I'll look through them. And by the end of that, every note should be in a folder. But by the end of my startup routine, there should be no notes left in the unsorted section of my notes app.
And I love this idea because even if you are listening right now and you're like, oh my gosh, I am not an organized person, color coding things scares me. I don't want to have multiple tabs, in a binder for things. And my son is definitely an organized person. And he's like, Mom, look, I have these tabs for this and this, and this is this, and this is this. And I'm like, oh, the apple really does not fall far. But I also understand that not everybody's brain works that way. And so I think, Joe, your point that you just made there about have the routine, know what the end goal is, that all the notes need to be sorted. You figure out how that needs to happen, that it best fits you. The point being, have the process in place. Because from there, I'm guessing once you need to go to pull that information, that's probably going to move us into the articulate piece of this acronym. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So once you've captured a bunch of ideas and you're sitting down, because like we said at the top of the show, nothing worse than sitting down and having just like a blank canvas. At the articulate point, you've captured a bunch of ideas and now you just need to pick one to run with, right? And so again, it could be the one that's lighting you up the most that week, the thing you're really thinking about. It could be a question from an audience. Anything that's in the articulate folder is something that you want to run with. And so write or outline, right? However you want to do your podcast episodes. If you do interviews, like find a guest that's an expert on that topic, but this could be where you keep the questions you're going to ask and any research you do. And this is the place that's where the content is going to happen, right? That's where the idea becomes content in the articulate phase.
Awesome. So do you have an order of preference, like which ideas you run with? Or is it just that you kind of look at what you've ideated on and then say, okay, I think this is what I want to create content on next? So I guess, is it more systematized or is it more intuitive for you?
It's definitely more intuitive for me because we're in the content creation game. You need to do something that you're really psyched about. I just published a piece called We Need to Talk About Editing. And I'm really excited about that because at Podcast Movement, I talk to a lot of people about it. And you're also passionate about that. So it's something that materialized quickly for me. I was like, oh, okay, three ways that you can improve your editing process, even if you refuse to hire an editor, is kind of the premise.
And that's great too, because I think that solves the problem of, okay, well, now I don't feel connected to the content, right? Where it's like, it's not like there's a systematized approach to knowing which content you need to then go and create episodes on, pulling from that articulate folder. But it's, okay, here's these ideas that I've captured. Which ones do I feel most inspired by right now, in this moment, in this season, this week, whenever that content creation needs to happen? And then you can pull from that because that energy is going to come through to your episode.
Yeah, so once you articulate, it's time to leverage. And leverage is a stand-in for me for repurpose. Repurpose has baggage, I think. People are like, oh, I'm going to repurpose my content by recording an interview and then like using that feature that will find the best 60 seconds, even though it's like a weird like minute and a half. And then I'll just publish that on social media. Leverage is leverage the content you've created in other places. But the important bit here is that you're creating content for that platform. Repurposing would be me recording an episode and then putting the transcript into AI and saying, turn this into a blog post, and then just wholesale publishing that blog post. Nope. I talk differently than I write because emotion comes through differently in voice. And so if I am recording an episode first, I create an outline, or I've been saying like fat outline, which is like a couple of sentences along with your points. And then I take that fat outline, I leverage that fat outline as the basis for my newsletter. And so this sounds like double duty, but it's going to be better content in both places, right? And then the other thing I'll do is after I record and I have the broad strokes of the episode, I will record a short form vertical video. It's not me clipping that episode. It's me giving you the TLDR of that episode. And I'll tell you what, I just did this for the editing episode I keep referencing. And the video on TikTok is my best performing TikTok video to date.
Well, there's something to be said for that. And I'm with you on the repurposing piece because it loses its energy when you go and start to chop it up and put it on different platforms. I feel like every platform has its own energy, it has its own vibe. And so if we are suddenly trying to take one piece of content that was created for platform A, let's say that's your podcast, and now we're trying to put it on platforms B, C, D, and E without actually reworking that content to fit the vibe of the platform it's going on, it's going to fall flat. And this is where people get frustrated because you're like, wait a minute, I spent 30 minutes creating that podcast episode. It's gold. Like what? Like, why is it not performing on these other platforms? But Joe, to your point, it's not taking that much extra work. We're still using the idea of the episode, but now we're actually being able to leverage that content in a way that is going to help you gain traction on those platforms, which ultimately will drive traffic back to your podcast when done right. Do you have any tricks or tools up your sleeve for streamlining this part of the process and helping it take less time than some people might be spending on this part of the process right now?
So, I mean, really, it's start the content where you're comfortable, right? Some people are better like word vomiting everything they're thinking about, and then maybe like having AI summarize and organize it, or just you reading through and summarizing and organizing it. I am better with a blinking cursor in a blank notes document. The point is, start where you're most comfortable because this will help you get those broad strokes down. And then you can create the content that works best for the platform. Yes, it takes some work. I'm not going to say like, oh, take your podcast episode transcript and feed it into ChatGPT and ask it for assets, because those aren't going to be good. But if you have a strong starting point, creating the content across various platforms will be easier because you have the broad strokes and you can just mold them to the platform.
Yeah. And this is what I hope that if you take nothing else away from this episode, that you begin to recognize that when it comes to mastering your craft as a podcast host, this is where the time needs to be spent. And yes, we can cut corners in other areas. You can go listen to Joe's podcast to learn how to streamline post-production after you hit that recording. You know, what does that look like then? How can we save time there? Or another way to look at it, how can we free up some time that you're maybe spending on other things right now that aren't as high value so that you can focus where it matters when it comes to being the host of your podcast, and also systematize that to the degree that you can so that you have a flow, you have a system for capturing these ideas and being able to articulate those and then being able to turn those into content for the podcast platform and any other platform or platforms that you're looking to grow. So Joe, take us through the M of this framework, the metric piece.
Yes. So M is measure, right? You want to look at your analytics. This is important because without this, you're flying blind. Before GPS, we had to use paper maps and plot our route. And if something came up that was unforeseeable because we have a paper map, like an accident or a road closure, we'd have to remap. And it was a very inefficient, but really the only way we had of getting from A to B. Now with GPS, we're not only getting the directions barked out at us, but we're also getting real-time traffic updates. And so when there's a road closure or extra traffic, the GPS says, hey, we're going to take you on a shorter route. This is what measuring does for your content, because you can put out 5 episodes, and if one crushes it, you need to know that this is what your audience wants. And it's not just about download numbers. It's about, getting into Apple Podcasts or Spotify for podcasters and looking at the consumption rate. On the panel that you were on at Podcast Movement, this came up, and I was just like nodding heavily in agreement, right? Because a download's a download, but if people only stick around for a minute, that's the content is worthless, right? But if you're seeing like, oh man, people usually consume 40% of my content, but for this episode, they consumed 80, to do more of that. And so you can say, oh, all right, well, last week I talked about how baseball equates to repurposing versus leveraging. This week I'll talk about how swimming does or how pickleball does or whatever, right? You can reframe the same problem in a few different ways, and you can really leverage that to grow your podcast and build an audience.
I love this because without that feedback loop, you're going to be flying blind. You're not going to know where you're headed, and you're going to want that end goal of growth, whether that be increased downloads, increased conversions from your podcast, increased exposure, all of the above. But you won't be able to have that feedback loop of knowing, is this actually landing? Are these topics actually resonating? Which topics are resonating? Which ones should I dive deeper into? And Joe, I know thanks to your automations, both on the content ideation side and also on the post-production side, you've been able to save up to 12 hours a week on your own podcast, help other podcasters do the same thing, and grow your podcast to the tune of 60,000 downloads a month and 30 to 50K a year in sponsorships. So I asked Joe if he would stick around and break down exactly how he did this, kind of building off of what we've been talking about here in this episode. So don't go anywhere because we're going to jump into that in the next episode. But Joe, for what you've shared here, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks so much for having me. I love talking about this stuff.
And if you loved what we covered inside this episode, you are definitely going to love the next one, because Joe is going to be back talking about how saving this time on the content ideation and creation process and streamlining his post-production process freed up time for him to pursue valuable sponsorships for his podcast to the tune of $50,000 every year in revenue. He's joining us back in the next episode to break down exactly how he did it and how you can do it too. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.